Death comes for us all, or so they say. But in the ancient port city of Joppa, there once lived a woman so beloved that when death came knocking, an entire town stood at her doorstep and said, "No, not her, not today." In a humble room, an empty bed lies silent. The sheets are still warm, wrinkled from her last moments. Beside them, a needle and thread rest abandoned, tools that had, until recently, been extensions of her very hands. Around this bed, women gather, their faces streaked with tears, clutching carefully made garments to their chests, as if holding onto pieces of her heart. This is the story of Tabitha, known to some as Dorcas, a widow whose hands never seemed to rest. In the bustling port of Joppa, where merchants hawked their wares and sailors told tales of distant shores, she was the thread that bound the community together. Every stitch she sewed carried with it a prayer. Every garment she crafted wrapped someone in dignity. You would find her in the marketplace at dawn, seeking out the shivering child to wrap in a new cloak. By midday, she might be teaching young widows the art of the loom, helping them find purpose in their grief. As evening fell, she would be ladling soup into bowls for hungry families, her gentle smile as warming as the meal itself. But even the strongest threads can fray. On a day like any other, as she worked to finish just one more garment, "Just one more," she always said, her hands began to tremble. The needle that had danced so surely through countless pieces of cloth slipped from her grazing fingers, falling to the floor in a terrible silence. Tabitha, the woman who had lifted so many others, collapsed in the very marketplace, where she had spent years lifting others up. The response was immediate. Those who had watched her care for others now rushed to care for her. Healers came and went, their faces growing more solemn with each visit. Outside her small home, the community gathered, their prayers rising like incense into the evening air. But despite their desperate hopes, despite their fervent prayers, Tabitha's strength continued to fade. In her final moments, she was surrounded by those she loved, the widows she had taught, the orphans she had clothed, the hungry she had fed. They watched helplessly as her breathing grew shallow, like the gentle ebb of Joppa's tide. Then, like a candle's flame in a sudden breeze, she was gone. But Joppa was not ready to let her go. "This cannot be the end," declared one of the widows, her voice thick with tears, but strong with determination. "She gave us all second chances. She showed us how to live again after we thought all hope was lost. There must be something we can do." Word spread through the mourning town of Peter, the apostle of Jesus, who was staying in nearby Lydda. Without hesitation, 2 young men burst from the grieving crowd, their feet pounding against the dusty road as they ran to find him. Their mission was clear: bring back the one man who might be able to do the impossible. When Peter arrived, he found a house overflowing with mourners. The widows, their eyes red from weeping, surrounded him, each holding up garments Tabitha had made. "Look," they said, showing him tunics and cloaks, each stitch a testament to her love. "She made this for my son when we had nothing. This cloak kept my mother warm through her final winter. These clothes helped me find work, gave me dignity when I had lost everything." Their stories filled the room, painting a portrait not just of a seamstress, but of a woman who had woven herself into the very fabric of their lives. Peter listened to their testimonies, his expression shifting from sympathy to something more, a quiet resolution. With gentle authority, he asked everyone to leave the room. The mourners filed out, their sobs echoing in the narrow stairwell, until only Peter remained with Tabitha's body. In the hushed chamber, Peter knelt beside her bed. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting a golden glow across her still face. He bowed his head in prayer, the weight of the community's grief and hope pressing upon him. Then, with unwavering faith, he spoke two simple words that would echo through history. "Tabitha, arise." For a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then, a flutter. The smallest movement of her eyelids, like a butterfly testing its wings. Color began to return to her cheeks, spreading like dawn across the horizon. Her chest rose with a deep breath, and her eyes opened, blinking in confusion at the light. Peter took her hand, helping her sit up, then stand. Her legs were shaky, but growing stronger with each passing moment. He called out to the waiting believers and widows, his voice carrying through the doorway, "Come and see." The joy that erupted was like nothing Joppa had ever witnessed. People fell to their knees, weeping in gratitude. Others ran through the streets, shouting the impossible news. "Tabitha, Tabitha lives. She has returned to us." The word spread like fire through the port city, from the marketplace to the harbor, from the poorest hovels to the merchants' houses. The streets filled with people running to witness the miracle with their own eyes. Those who had been preparing for her burial now found themselves preparing a feast of celebration. The wailing of mourners transformed into songs of joy. And in the midst of it all stood Tabitha, embracing those who had refused to let her go. The ripples of that day spread far beyond Joppa's shores. People came from distant towns to hear the story, to see with their own eyes the woman who had returned from death's threshold. Many who heard the tale found their hearts opened to a new kind of faith, one that spoke not just of power, but of love, strong enough to pierce the veil between life and death. But for Tabitha, life continued much as it had before, yet somehow deeper, richer. Her hands returned to their familiar work, though now each stitch carried new meaning. Those who watched her noticed something different in her eyes, a glimpse of something eternal, as if she had brought back with her some secret knowledge from beyond. The room where she had once lain lifeless became a place of teaching, where she showed younger women how to thread needles and mend tears, not just in fabric, but in lives. The community that had refused to let her die now worked alongside her with renewed purpose, understanding that every act of kindness rippled outward like waves from a stone cast into still waters. And so, as the sun sets over Joppa's harbor each evening, you might still see Tabitha at her window, needle and thread in hand. The port city bustles below, its streets filled with people whose lives bear the imprint of her touch. Some say heaven wouldn't take Tabitha because earth needed her more. Others say God sent her back as living proof that love is stronger than death. But everyone in Joppa knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, when a life touches enough hearts, even death itself must take a step back and make way for miracles. Each thread of her story, her death, her return, and most importantly, her life of extraordinary kindness, weaves together to form a tapestry more beautiful than any garment she ever made. It's a story that reminds us that the greatest miracles often come wrapped not in grand displays of power, but in simple acts of love, sewn together one stitch at a time. For in the end, It wasn't just Tabitha who was brought back to life that day. It was an entire community's faith in the power of love to overcome even death itself.